There was so much fantastic chess played at the Crypto Cup online tournament, and it wasn't possible to cover everything, of course. But I would like to just fill in a gap here and show you a game between Magnus Carlsen and Teimour Radjabov from the semi-final. And this was a wonderful strategic game. Don't forget to like, comment, share and do subscribe. Let's try and push to 100k. Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces. e4. And Radjabov played b6. Well, a little bit left field, literally. It doesn't have a fantastic reputation, but of course this is rapid play and strange things can happen. You know, it's a bit different. e6 and knight f3. And now Raja goes for a kind of hippopotamus variation. Well, a modified hippopotamus anyway. Let's see how things go. So castles and knight d7. I think the secret in facing openings like this for white is not to go too crazy. If you don't try to refute it, I think that's the best thing to do. You can't really refute this opening, but what you can do is simply get a very pleasant position. And Carlsen was very clever here. So first of all, he played a4. Well, if white gets in a5, then that is very annoying. So black has to react to that. Now you can either block it with a5, but then again the b5 square could be useful for white, or you play a6. Okay, that's solid. So you can meet a5 with b5. Now rook e1 from Carlsen. So simple development, supporting the pawn, and now knight d2. So he's not going for a huge pawn front with c4. Instead, he's got another idea, and bishop e7. So this is a modified hippo. The kind of true hippo is to go knight e7 and then g6 and bishop g7. So, but this is a little bit different. Knight f1. This kind of position might be, or this kind of maneuver, I'm sure is familiar to you. If you just think of the Spanish, and white also plays like this. And knight g3. So this is really sensible from Carlsen. So he's playing with his pieces. He's content just to have his 2 pawns in the middle. And here black has a dilemma. White controls the centre. Black needs to stake a claim in the middle of the board. How do you do that? Well, if you play c5, then white can simply support the pawn on d4 and, well, it doesn't attack the centre at all. If you go for d5, then white just pushes on and gets a really favourable French defence. Therefore, Radjabov went for e5. So this is really curious. We've now arrived at a kind of Spanish position. And in fact, it looks very similar to a Breyer variation, where the knights are here and, well, the pieces are exactly in the right formation for a Breyer. Rook e8. So that means the rook is trying to get a bit of pressure here. So eventually might force white into making a decision with the d pawn. And I really like this move from Carlsen. This works out beautifully. Bishop d2 looks very modest. You might think, well, why even move the bishop? It's doing a decent job on c1. Doesn't seem to be any better placed on d2, but watch out. So bishop f8. So a little bit more pressure being brought to bear on that e-pawn. But at the moment, white has everything covered. 3 defending, 3 attacking. b4 from Carlsen. And this is a very nice move, as we're going to see. Basically, it really thwarts black's queenside counterplay. Normally in, well, I'll comment on this in a second where it's easier to see. G6 from Radjabov. So he's playing very much in the style of the Breyer. This bishop is going to come to G7, and that will increase the pressure on the center. It might be possible to open things up. Queen C1. Now this is the point. The point of bishop D2. Carlsen claims this diagonal, and that is very annoying for black. That means that white is able to use those squares on the king side really well, and it allows white to start an attack a bit later, as we'll see. Bishop G7. A5. Now we can see again that the point for advancing these queenside pawns. So basically, if black leaves that there, then white is going to take and get a positional advantage. So B5 should be played. But the problem is that the queenside pawns are now closed, and in the normal Breyer variation, very often black is able to get queenside counterplay. So this means that Carlsen, particularly as he's claimed this diagonal, is able to turn his attention to the king side. Bishop H6. Good move. And, well, here Raja drops the bishop back to H8. Black could take and bring the queen over here. That's an alternative way of playing the position. White is very, very comfortable here, but at least that queen can come over to defend the king side. But white has a positional advantage. In any case, bishop H8 played. And now Carlsen closes the position. He makes sure this bishop is not going to join in the game. And here black has to strike out. If white's pawn is left there, then it's a problem. So black has to move the c pawn. Now, do you play to c6 or do you play to c5? Radjabov went to c5. c6, I think, is a bit more complicated, but still very pleasant for white after c4. And the basic idea is that this is pretty nasty. There's already threats to play knight g5, but, well, black can break out, but this is a nice position for white. You can see this little pawn duo is very nice. That pawn is attacked. The queen looks down here. White is better. Let's come back. So c6 was not played, but instead c5. So still looks like a Spanish. And now Carlsen did not take here, which would have would transpose to that last variation. And he simply played h3, and that's a typical, well, he starts a very typical Spanish strategy here. White needs to somehow break through on the king side. The queen side is potentially closed, or black can exchange here, but there's not much going on the c file. But it's pretty much closed, certainly for white. So white needs to switch to the king side and open up lines. So that's why Carlsen played h3. Queen g5 also possible, just bringing the queen over to the zone. But let's see his strategy, because this is classic Spanish strategy. Radjabov closes the queen side completely. I mean, I'm slightly surprised at that. You know, now there is not a glimmer of counterplay. And then he dropped the knight back to f8. You know, very often these kind of positions, you can sack a piece for 2 pawns here. In this position, it's really hopeless. White's piece activity is too great here. So Radjabov is really passive. Queen d2, I think that is now directed against this sacrifice. So just giving extra protection to the pawn on d5. Bishop c8. Obviously the bishop now just biting on granite. So drops back to c8. And now here we see one of the points to h3. The knight drops back and introduces the idea of playing f4. So this is so typical for these Spanish positions. You need to open things up. Bishop g7. Raja now thinks, okay, this is getting dangerous. I need to get rid of that bishop. Rook f1, just shifting over. Bishop takes bishop, queen takes, and king h8. So he's got rid of the bishops, and now he needs to expel the queen with knight g8. Queen comes back to d2. Now it's clear that Carlsen is going to play f4 to crack open the f-file, and that could spell trouble for black. So therefore, knight d7. And the idea is that the knight will take the place of the pawn. But Carlsen still goes for f4. Now, if black stays passive, that's absolutely horrible. Knight g4 will come, and white has such an easy kingside attack. So pawn takes pawn, rook takes, and knight e5. Very often this is the way to defend against this f4 push. And if that knight can remain there, then black surely has chances to defend. It covers f7. But watch how Carlsen deals with this. This is really nice. Knight f3. So if he can exchange off the knight, then there's pressure on f7. So the other knight comes to defend. And here, you know, if I'm thinking back to sort of classic Spanish strategy, very often the move is knight d4 here, just to bypass that knight on e5, and the knight looks pretty good on this square. And also, you know, knight d4 means there's a bit of a traffic jam here. That knight gets in the way. But it's interesting, Carlsen did not go for the, I would say, the typical knight d4 move. He just played rook f1, and there's a very clever point to this. Radjabov exchanged and replaced the knight with another knight. But now the rook comes into f6. This is the point of Carlsen's strategy. Very straightforward. So that rook lands on f6, hits the d6 pawn, still attacking the f7 pawn. And this is now a very, very difficult position for black. So if queen e7, well, the queen could come into h6. Could also just put a bit more pressure on f7. And this knight could well spin round to d4, and who knows, maybe into c6. You know, there could be a chance to exchange this one off. I mean, there are various attacking ideas, strategic ideas that white has in this position. Yeah, got like queen f2, because it also looks in this direction. So rook f6 has just been played. But here, Radjabov saw a chance to trap that rook. He played bishop f5. So you can see the rook is trapped, but this did not work out well. Pawn takes bishop, and pawn takes pawn. So Carlsen has sacked the exchange. I mean, it's barely a sacrifice, because white's pieces now just flood into the position, and that bishop on c2, which was blocked by the pawn on e4, now enters the game. So often that happens in the Spanish. That bishop seems like it's blocked out by these pawns, and then suddenly the position explodes and it becomes, yeah, the famous Spanish bishop. The queen is attacked. So the queen moves. Knight f5. Queen attacked. And black's kingside is an utter mess. Knight takes d6. Well, I mean, black's position is just falling apart here. There really was nothing for Radjabov to do. Knight f5. So if we can just take stock for a moment. Black is the exchange up, but white has two pawns for it. This passed pawn is very strong. The pawn on g7 is pretty good. That knight on f5, wow. Well, all white's pieces in play and very, very dangerous. F6 protects the knight, but it's a forlorn defensive hope. D6 creates a square for the queen, and that's a pretty good pawn. Rook A7, Queen D5 check. The rook steps in the way. Now, what was Carlsen's winning move? Can you find the simplest way for white to win? There are many good moves here, but the best move is bishop d1, and here Radjabov resigned. Why did he resign? Well, if queen g6, that's an easy one. Knight e7, check, forks king and queen. Queen g5 loses to h4. We can just push the queen around, doesn't have a good square. Bishop h5, discovered attack. There you go. It's nice that the Spanish bishop plays a role. Takes. Knight h6 check. Let's go to checkmate. Here we go. Check. Rook takes. And queen g5 checkmate. As I said, right at the end, the Spanish bishop comes into play, and that is absolutely deadly. That was the final position. Wow, fantastic stuff from Carlsen, but he knows his classics. And, you know, when I think of typical Spanish games in the Brea, well, there's a wonderful game, Tal against Spassky. And there's also another one, Spassky against Portish, and in some ways quite similar games. I might show you one of those in a following video. Anyway, Carlsen knows his classics and very cleverly steered the game from this b6 opening, a little bit unorthodox, into a very orthodox Spanish position. Thanks for watching.